This has nothing to do with Jared Williams or his capabilities in the NFL or his talent level or any of that. But the Pittsburgh Steelers just wasted their 90th roster spot. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbine. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/allsteelerstalk or subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. And today we are talking about the Steelers' wasted last roster spot. The team went out and they signed Jared Williams, an offensive tackle out of Miami, who also played for the Houston Cougars. Spent last season with the Philadelphia Eagles. He becomes like the 1,500th name that used to play for the Philadelphia Eagles that is now in Pittsburgh. He also went out and signed running back Darius Hagans, who honestly, I feel pretty good about. If you're going to go out and swap skill players, you get rid of wide receiver Cody Crest and you bring in Hagans, and you look at this as an opportunity to find another sleeper, another diamond in the rough for your third running back spot. He will compete with Anthony McFarland, Jason Huntley, and Alfonso Graham. He is another HBCU player that I think, when I look at the HBCU guys, I think these are kids that didn't really get the full draft experience that a lot of teams overlooked because they only play certain competition during their NCAA career. This is a guy that could be a diamond in the rough. We've seen the past 2 or 3 years that these HBCU kids actually turn into something special in the NFL every once in a while. As an undrafted guy, you can't really rank him and say, oh, well, he went undrafted. He's from an HBCU. Most of them go undrafted. I honestly feel pretty good about that move. I don't know if it turns into anything, but that's an actual competition. That is somebody that comes in here and actually drives competition for a third roster spot that hasn't been deemed named. There is nobody that's a guarantee to be the running back behind Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Why not add competition? Which is exactly where I'm going with this one. Why would you add another offensive tackle if you are the Pittsburgh Steelers after you have spent the entire offseason loading up your offensive line to the point where Jared Williams doesn't make this roster? Even looking at it right now, unless he is something absolutely crazy and proves everybody wrong, he is not going to make this roster. The Steelers typically keep 3 to 4 offensive tackles on their roster. Right now, Dan Moore Jr., Chuks Okorafor, and Broderick Jones are locks. They are not going anywhere. They are not losing their jobs. They all have a spot on the 93-man roster. No matter how the starting lineup looks, all 3 of them are kept once the final product of the Pittsburgh Steelers is completed at the end of the summer. If they keep a 4th, you have to look at it like this. Mason Cole is your center, and even if Kendrick Green does not make the roster, the team is going to keep Kevin Dotson, Nate Herbig, and then that final piece to the puzzle will most likely be Spencer Anderson. Why? Because he could universally play all 5 spots on the line. He's got experience on all 5 spots on the line. You want that product. You want that guy who could come in here and be a safety blanket if Mason Cole goes down, if a guard goes down, if you're limited at tackle. He provides it all. He's your 7th round pick, so he already holds ground over everybody that you've signed this offseason. He's probably, unless he stinks, unless he doesn't turn into anything that's capable in the NFL, unless he's just another 7th round pick, chances are he's the guy that you're keeping. So there's your offensive line. You already knew that. We knew that 2 days ago. We knew that a week ago. We knew that the day after the NFL draft. So why would you use your last roster spot on a guy that isn't going to make the roster? And again, this has nothing to do with Jared Williams. This has nothing to do with his capabilities in the league or how good he is as a player. This 100% has to do with position of need. And the Steelers have some positions of need. They don't need a starter. They don't need to go out and get a superstar. What they need is competition. They only have 5 inside linebackers on the roster right now. One of them is Chappelle Russell, who spent the last 2 years on the practice squad. And you have to look at him and say, well, if you weren't good enough to make the active roster for the last 2 years, what's going to change this season? And maybe something does. But the fact that there is no competition for him to be the fifth roster spot or the fifth inside linebacker on the roster for the Steelers is a little concerning. The Steelers always keep at least 5 inside linebackers. They keep their 3 primary guys, which will right now be a Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, and Mark Robinson. Their big special teams guy, which will be Tanner Muse. And then they typically keep another one as a safety blanket. And right now, they only have 5. There's no competition. At safety, you have Trey Norwood trying to compete as that 4th safety that actually plays defense, but he struggled the last 2 years. And you don't have a spot to drive that competition because you just used it on an offensive tackle that doesn't drive competition. Stephen Thompson, my co-host, tossed out the idea of a safety. And for the first time, my thought was that makes so much sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Why are they not going to do that? Why are they not considering it? And that's the other thing. The Steelers have gone out and they've dipped their toes in the free agency market with names that actually mean something in the NFL. Quan Alexander wasn't just here for nothing. He didn't show up in Pittsburgh to have lunch with Omar Khan and get out because they're old pals. He showed up in Pittsburgh because they were genuinely considering adding another inside linebacker. Why did they stop? Why did they stop looking for anybody with meaning and just start looking for another player to add from the Philadelphia Eagles? And don't get me wrong, there's a positive to this. The Steelers have been begged by their fans and by many analysts for years now to go head first and dive as heavy into building their trenches as possible. Fans have pleaded and pleaded and pleaded to go get some franchise guys to put up front and protect their quarterback and their running back. They did that, and they've gone way too overboard with it. But if we're being honest, it's better than not going overboard at all. It's better than just adding Broderick Jones and moving on with your life and saying that was good enough. The Steelers said, we will make sure that this offensive line is as good as it could possibly be. And that means even the final roster spot being a competition for names like Spencer Anderson and Dylan Cook and LaRaven Clark and so on and so forth. When on paper, the roster looks as good as it does right now, it's okay to go heavy and too much into one position when it's the offensive line. But I don't agree that you waste your final roster spot on a position that doesn't drive competition. I do not agree that you waste a roster spot on a position that you already know isn't going to make the roster because there is no room for him. Even if they brought in a long snapper, you look at that and say, well, it's competition, and it's true competition, and it gives Christian Kuntz something to work towards. What's an offensive tackle doing? If this was a nose tackle or another defensive tackle, a guy that hasn't been proven, because that's the thing here. No matter what other position you bring in, those guys are unproven. They do not hold ground in Pittsburgh, at least not enough not to drive competition. On the offensive line, Dan Moore is staying. Chooks is staying. Broderick Jones is your first round pick. He's staying. You don't have the room. You have a bunch of guys that are competing for a final roster spot when you have a favorite already that you want to be that guy that earns that final roster spot. Nobody in Pittsburgh is hoping that Jared Williams beats out Spencer Anderson because it looks bad for the front office. Why didn't they have Jared Williams a year ago? Why did they sign Spencer Anderson? Why did they waste another 7th round pick on a guy who didn't make the team? That's what the question is. So they want Spencer Anderson to make the roster. They want all their draft picks to be on the 53 man once the season starts. You always have to have a couple of practice squad guys. But the Steelers roster is going to change so much between now and the end of August. It's going to be crazy. There will be a dozen plus moves when they swap guys out for different positions and they go out and they make different moves as guys get cut and as their team needs change. Right now, it was just about filling the 90th roster spot with somebody who you actually believe is worth a spot on your summer roster to start this thing off strong. And instead, they went out and got another offensive tackle that they cannot evaluate until July, because if you ask Mike Tomlin or anybody else in the NFL, they're going to tell you you cannot evaluate an offensive lineman until the pads come on. They just went out and got a guy that's going to hang out and sit around until July and then play minimal snaps on a position that you already know who you want to make the roster. Again, nothing against Jared Williams. I wish him all the best, and I hope that this dude turns into a franchise tackle, if not in Pittsburgh, somewhere else in the NFL. It is simply about positional need. And the Steelers went out and they just said, yeah, we'll just add anybody. And they did not get any value in that position of need. It was a wasted move. It was a wasted 90th roster spot.